Go to wineaccess.com/ham. You get 20% off anything you order. You can order $20 bottles of wine. You can order $150 bottles of wine. And you can send them to people. And you can send them to family. You can send them to friends. You can send them, hell, just send them to your wife or girlfriend.
You and I both love college football. The college football playoff could expand. I think from what I've read, 2023 would be the earliest. So we'd still have a 2021 CFP, 4 teams, a 2022 CFP, 4 teams. But there's a lot of discussion about a 12. And you read this morning, right, that the recommendation is going to be 12. Now, the reason there's a recommendation is there's 3 sets of people involved here. You have what they call the College Football Working Group. The working group is, I think it's 4 people doing a bunch of research, talking to a bunch of people around the sport. Their job is to make a recommendation to the commissioners of the conferences, plus Jack Swarbrick, who's the AD at Notre Dame. They act independently. So those people, I think it's 12 of them, the 11 commissioners plus Notre Dame, are going to meet next week. And they're going to consider this recommendation of a playoff expansion to 12. And then they're going to turn around and they're going to make another recommendation to another group of people in 2 weeks, which is 11 or 12 presidents and chancellors representing all the conferences. And so then they're going to decide, should we expand the college football playoff to 12? But it does feel like there's a little momentum here for this.
Feels inevitable, to be honest with you. Like I think the 4 teams is over, right? Within a couple years, whenever this date, 2023, like we're going to get 12 teams. Now, to me, the fascinating part is that first weekend, or is it, six games? Is it a couple buys? I think you could set it up, several different ways. I don't think it would be crazy to go basically seed 1 through 12. I mean, because I think what the NFL would tell you is the games are where you get money. That's where the bye weeks, there's a balance of giving a team like Alabama the last several years would always get the bye weeks. But like having them play the 12th seed is going to get you probably the highest views, right? Them or Ohio State or whatever. I wonder if they even do buys, if they just did one, like there are 6 games that weekend, right? 3 and 3, kind of like NFL wildcard weekend now does the 3. And what did they do? They took away a bye. When you do add a team, I think the first reaction is, you do the buys, you set the 4. I don't know if that's the case though, because they make their money from the games.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could obviously go 2 ways. I think the benefit, let's say you're Alabama and you expect to be a 1 seed. On one hand, you don't want to play because a bye is really valuable. So you would play 1, 2, 3, 4. Those top 4 seeds each have a bye, and then your remaining teams play one another.
But there is somewhat of a bye built in because you get several weeks until playoffs start.
True, but playing this many games in a row is just a pretty unique challenge in a college football playoff, right? You could argue on one hand for Alabama, let's say, it just adds variables and reduces the likelihood that you win the national championship. The benefit would be if you play these first few rounds on home sites. So when you get a bye, what you actually get is 1 less home date. And the home date's pretty valuable to an institution. So I think the expectation, right, is that you would get the first round or 2 rounds on site. So if it's Ohio State, if it's Oregon, they're hosting at their stadium. But if you get a bye, you lose a home date. So I do think there is a case to be made to not give anybody a bye because it does add more games and it adds more teams. I think a lot of people have been talking about 8 games, myself included, for a while. 8-team playoff. And I think one of the reasons that 12 has kind of come out as a leader over 8 is because if you're the SEC specifically, going to 8 doesn't really help you a ton. In the CFP era, there's only been 1 year that the SEC had 3 teams ranked in the top 8. So most years in an 8-team playoff, the SEC would have the same number of teams in an 8-team playoff as they have in a 4-team playoff. So they don't have a lot of incentive to expand to 8 because they're thinking, we're going to get 2 teams in and 4. That's better. It's smaller pie. We get more money. We get 50% of the pot, basically, of the pot that gets split. So I think going to 12 makes it a little more palatable to get somebody who doesn't really have any incentive to change to 8 to change to 12. So you're looking at 5 auto bids for conference champions, and then a 6th automatic bid for the highest ranked group of 5 team. It's like the last few years would be Cincinnati. A few years before that, UCF. And then the rest of them at larges, the other 6 at larges.
You would have to do some sort of buy because with 12 teams would go to 6, and then you couldn't just have 3 teams, right?
So, yeah, you're saying you could do a single team buy?
Yeah, like the number 1 overall seed gets the buy type deal. But like this will be fucking huge. I mean, this will be massive. And the reality is a Power 5 conference, more than likely the SEC or the Big Ten is going to benefit with the extra teams, and those extra teams will typically be a Florida, a Georgia, a Penn State, a Wisconsin, right? If the Pac-12 is doing well, an Oregon and a USC, right? Hopefully Herm gets that going, maybe Arizona State. You know, if Sark gets Texas rolling, maybe Texas, Oklahoma, right? I mean, I think we have a pretty good idea, give or take, like the 20 teams. Now, the curveball would just always be the non-Power 5 guy. Is that Cincinnati? Is that Boise? Is that UCF? But that's really just, you know, probably, what would you say, 5 to 6 programs fighting for one spot. And then the other Power 5s, we have a pretty good idea of the, I would say, 20 to 25 teams fighting for the 11 spots, right?
Yeah. But you know, you could all, that's the beauty though. Like you said, you could
and
always
every
get
year maybe like Iowa State
Washington
gets
State
in,
had
or,
a year where they were in the mix, right?
I mean,
and to me that's the key. It's not just who's in, but it's instead of talking about 4 or 5, what do we usually end up talking? By October, you're talking about like 11 teams that have a chance to go to the college football playoff. Maybe,
yeah,
right?
and by late October, we're really focused on like 6, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to a couple years ago when I think it was Oregon and Washington State, and they were ranked like in the 12s. And I was like, could any of them get to the top 4? Even though you know they probably can't. They're in the now you're talking about 20. We're probably talking about 21, 22 teams at the end of October.
Yeah.
So that's a major value. Now, if you're playing in the first round of a 12-team playoff, and you make it to the championship game, which is going to be hard to do if you got 4 teams with a bye, you're talking about 17 games. So you're talking about the same number of games, potentially, for a couple of teams. At most, you'd have 2 teams if both teams make a run that play 17 games. You're talking about the number of games that NFL players fought to prevent. Like, the NFL just did a battle to get to 17 games. So I think
that includes playoffs, though. The different, you know, the NFL, good teams play, and preseason, they end up playing. I guess the guys don't play in the preseason, but they play 20 games, then 2 or 3 more.
Yeah, I mean, like in the NFL, most teams don't play 20 games. In college football, most teams, at most, you'd have 2 teams play 17. I do think, though, in my life of talking about this, for, you know, going back to when I was doing radio in college, like, this has always been a topic. One of the main points of resistance is player safety. Can you subject college football players to 16, 17, to truly like a full season? And this is where I think name, image, likeness, and the ability for athletes to make money in college comes into play. It actually alleviates some of the criticism here that you're subjecting amateurs to an unnecessarily long season. Because now you could say, well, it's long, but they are now able to benefit financially. And the stage that this puts them on, it helps the sport, and in turn it helps them. And there will be more money in this little economy we got going here that's not so little. And yes, there will be a physical trade-off to the number of games they got to play, but there's also going to be a benefit, not just for us as the sport, as the institutions, but for the players. Like, I think that's part of this argument that could be made. So,
well, it's a massive moneymaker.
Yeah.
That to me is, I mean, it's a massive moneymaker.
It makes it.
To me, ultimately, they're expanding it, like, first and foremost, the money.
Well, what other reason would they expand it for?
Well, I'm just mean, like,
fun.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean,
yeah,
part
it is.
Like, to be a big moneymaker, people have to be interested, right? You never be like, well, no one gives a fuck, and it's a big moneymaker. That's not the way the world works. Like, it is cool. Like, if I'm at Washington State, or I'm, you know, like, the one thing about the Power Fives, as someone who didn't go to the Power Fives, it would be a big deal. Like, Wisconsin ain't making the playoffs without this happening. They make the playoffs. That's a big fucking deal for that university. Or if somehow Harbaugh or Penn State or Miami or like some of the Texas, like, it's a really big deal for just interest, right? And the more people that are interested, the more money you can ultimately make. You just want more people at your dance. It's the greatest part about it's always been this way, but like as college basketball relevancy has diminished and dwindled during the season, their tournament still is sweet because all of a sudden I haven't really been paying attention. If I'm my Wisconsin basketball fan, I'm locked in if my team's like a 4 seed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's more inclusive. And I think even
more unlikely for a huge set of upsets, right? Like a Loyola, like the UCF probably ain't winning multiple games against like A&M and then beating Wisconsin. More unlikely, but who knows? That's a great. We never know till you play.
It's more inclusive, but it also it helps even if you're not an Alabama fan, a Clemson fan, an Oregon fan, whatever. The fact is, the last 3 national championships have been 3 of the 4 lowest rated CFP titles. Now, last year you could say outlier, throw it out. But like a couple years ago at Levi Stadium, Alabama-Clemson was one of the lowest rated national title games in recent history. There's a little fatigue on the grades.
It felt like the 10th time they played.
And it was that's what I'm saying. Right? There's some Alabama-Clemson national title game fatigue. It's lost a little intrigue.
They're still going to be that. Those 2 guys are going to be the heavy favorites going into the Sweet 16 or 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it'll be shocking if neither one is like a top 4 seed, right?
Well, I mean, especially when you just look at the landscape
easier for
of
Clemson.
It's just
the
resistance. I don't know one thing you got to figure out is what exactly you do with Notre Dame. Notre Dame doesn't want to. It's not beneficial for Notre Dame or Clemson for Notre Dame to join the ACC. Right? Like Clemson, they've got a clear path every year to the automatic bid right now. And if you're Notre Dame, you're like, look, we can be a top 12 at-large team. That's not a problem for us. We're doing that every year. But if you're Notre Dame, you are going like, all right, everyone's getting an automatic and guaranteed seat at this table, but not us. But, what I would say to them is you've gone your own way. It's been wildly successful for you. That's just part of the deal here. They do schedule difficultly most years, Notre Dame. They built-in games with some really good teams like USC and Stanford. They played the home-and-home with Georgia, so I don't think they'll have a problem, but that is just kind of one. I think what's been interesting here is this idea of 12 feels like it's come out of nowhere as like the front runner, and there really is not a reason not to do it. The fact that they're not only going to go, forget about 8 to 12 potentially, and do it before the television contract is up, gives you an idea, even though we don't know exactly the numbers, gives you an idea of how massively beneficial it would be for everybody financially.